Dear students, welcome to online class arranged by National University. I'm happy to be the part of this journey. Today I'll be discussing on Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. This text is in your syllabus, that is Introduction to Prose. As you see on the screen, that our today's topic is on Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. This is for B Honors Part 1, course code 211107, and the name of the course is Introduction to Prose. As you see on the screen that our discussion will be focused on Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. I am Muhammad Ishtaq Hassan, Assistant Professor, Department of English at Dhaka City College. I welcome you all in my today's class. So let's have a glance of our today's discussion. First of all, I'll be talking about the author, the key facts, summary of the text, themes, discussion, questions, and also the symbols will be discussed. And finally, we'll be also discussing summary of the lecture. As you see on the screen, that Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell. His full name is Eric Arthur Blair, and known better to the world as George Orwell. And he was born in Midnapur, India on 25th of June 1903. His father was a colonel in British Indian Army. He got his education at Eton. We'll also know more about this author, as we see that he was born in India, but he was most of his time in his life passed at different places. So as we can see on the screen that what we are discussing is about the author, and we see how his life was passed. His real name is Eric Arthur Blair, but he is mostly known as George Orwell. He was an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic. His work is marked by lucid prose, awareness of social injustice, opposition to totalitarianism, and commitment to democratic socialism. He passed his earlier life in India. His mother brought him and his older sister, Marjorie, to England about a year after his birth and settled in Henley-on-Thames. Because his father stayed behind in India and rarely visited George Orwell, and his father never formed a strong bond. Orwell was later sent to a boarding school, which he hated, and where he got his first taste of England's class system. On a partial scholarship, Orwell noticed that the school treated the richer students better than the poorer ones. He won a scholarship to Wellington College and Eton College to continue his studies. Because his family couldn't pay for his university education, Orwell joined the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, then a British colony. He resigned in 1927 and decided to become a writer. Orwell is well known for his literary criticism, poetry, fiction, and polemical journalism. He has gained worldwide acknowledgement for his dystopian novel 1984, which was published in 1949, and the allegorical novella Animal Farm in 1945. His book Homage to Catalonia 1938, an account of his experience in the Spanish Civil War, is widely acclaimed, as his numerous essays on politics, literature, language, and culture. In 2008, the Times ranked him second on a list of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945. We see that his work has had a great impact on popular and political culture. The term Orwellian is an example of his influence. This term describes totalitarian or authoritarian social practice. It has entered the English language together with many other of his neologisms, including Cold War, Big Brother, Thought Police, and Thought Crime. Orwell was diagnosed as having tuberculosis in December 1947. Since then, his health continued to decline and he died on 21st of January 1950. So we'd like to know about the text. George Orwell's Shooting an Elephant first appeared in 1936. The British public already knew Orwell was as the socially conscious author of Shooting an Elephant. It functions as an extension to Burmese Days. The story and the novel share the same setting and draw on Orwell's experience as a colonial official in India and Burma, two regions of the British Empire. So we came to know about the text, and we'll also know more about the text as we find that this text is one of the important writings by George Orwell, and we also find how he was treated by the common people. So we know that George Orwell works as a sub-divisional police officer in a town in the British colony of Burma, now the Myanmar, and Myanmar was the part of India at the time. He's a military occupier. He is hated by much of the village. Though the Burmese never staged a full revolt, they expressed their disgust by taunting Orwell at every opportunity. The situation provokes two conflicting responses in Orwell. On the one hand, his role makes him despise the British Empire's systematic mistreatment of his subjects. On the other hand, he resents the local because they torment him. Orwell is caught between considering the British Raj an unbreakable tyranny and believing that killing a troublesome villager would be the greatest joy in the world. So we see one day an incident takes place that shows Orwell's the real nature of imperialism. A domesticated elephant has escaped from its chain and gone somewhere else, threatening villagers and property. The only person capable of controlling the elephant is its mahout. Went looking for the elephant in the wrong direction and is now 12 hours away. Orwell goes to the neighborhood where the elephant was last spotted. The neighborhood's inhabitants gave such conflicting reports that Orwell nearly concludes that the whole story was nothing but false. Suddenly, he hears an uproar nearby and rounds a corner to find a coolie, a laborer, lying dead in the mud, crushed and skinned alive by the rogue elephant. Orwell orders a subordinate to bring him a gun strong enough to shoot the elephant. Orwell's subordinate returns with the gun and locals reveal that the elephant is in a nearby field. Orwell walks to the field and a large group from the neighborhood follows him. The townspeople have seen the gun and are excited to see the elephant shot. Orwell feels uncomfortable. He had not planned to shoot the elephant, but he was compelled to do that. The group comes upon the elephant in the field eating grass. Seeing the peaceful creature makes Orwell realize that he should not shoot it. Besides, shooting a full-grown elephant is like destroying expensive infrastructure. After coming to this conclusion, Orwell looks at the assembled crowd and the numbering in the thousands and realizes that they expect him to shoot the elephant, as if part of a theatrical performance. The true cost of white Westerners' conquest of the Orient, Orwell realizes the white man's freedom. The colonizers are puppets, bound to fulfill their subjects' expectations. Orwell has to shoot the elephant, or else he will be laughed at by villagers, an outcome he finds intolerable. So he is compelled to shoot the elephant. The best course of action, Orwell decides, would be to approach the elephant and see how it responds, but to do this would be dangerous and might set Orwell up to a humiliated in front of the villagers. The downed elephant continues to breathe. So after the bullets fire on the elephant, it also starts to breathe. Oral fires more, but the bullets have no effect. The elephant is obviously in agony. Oral is distraught to see the elephant, powerless to move and yet powerless to die. So he can understand the condition of the elephant. Oral leaves the scene, unable to watch the beast suffer. He later hears that it took the elephant half an hour to die. Villagers strip the meat of its bone and shortly thereafter. Orwell's choice to kill the elephant was controversial. The elephant's owner was angry, but as an Indian, had no legal way. Older British agreed with Orwell's choice, but younger colonies thought it was inappropriate to kill an elephant just because it killed a coolie, since they think elephants are more valuable than coolies. Orwell notes that he is lucky the elephant killed a man because it gave his own actions legal justification. Finally, Orwell wonders if any of his comrades understand that he killed the elephant solely to avoid looking fool. So he was compelled to kill the elephant because he doesn't want to be fooled by the people of that village. Let us move on to the summary of the text. As a British police officer in the hillside town of Moulmein in Lower Burma, the narrator frequently endures jeers from the natives. They do not realize that he too opposes English occupation of Burma. In his position, he sees the misery that imperialism produces. So we can see that he understands the condition of the people and he doesn't want the domination of the British. In Moulmein, the unnamed narrator is a police officer during a period of intense anti-European sentiment. Although his intellectual sympathies lie with the Burmese, his official role makes him a symbol of the oppressive imperial power. As such, he is subjected to constant baiting by the local people. After receiving a call regarding a normally tame elephant's rampage, the narrator, armed with a .44 caliber Winchester rifle and riding on a pony, goes to the rice paddies where the elephant has been seen. Entering one of the poorest quarters, he receives conflicting reports and contemplates leaving, thinking the incident is not the right incident. The narrator then sees a village woman chasing away children who are looking at the corpse of an Indian whom the elephant has trampled and killed. He sends an orderly to bring an elephant rifle and followed by a group of roughly a few thousand people heads towards the paddy field where the elephant has rested in its tracks. Even though he doesn't want to shoot the elephant, he feels surrendered to all these yellow faces around him, and he's not willing to look like an idiot to them. He does 40 things they want and kills the elephant. This is the summary of the text. But apart from that, there are many things are lying in this text. And we move on to the historical background of India. So Burma, present-day Myanmar, became a province of India on January 1st, 1886, when India was part of the British Empire. European interest in India began when the Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama arrived there in 1498. So the British has an ill motive of dominating all the world, different parts of the world. And we see that how Burma was dominated by India. And we see that European interest in India began when the Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama arrived there in 1498. In 1600, England chartered the East India Company to exploit Asian resources and within decades established trading posts in key Indian cities. Over the next 2.5 centuries, Britain expanded its economic interest in India. In 1858, Britain transferred control of India from the East India Company to the British government. So a kind of shift is seen over here. The British overlords directly imposed their will and their ways on three-fifths of the population in what became known as British India, and indirectly on two-fifths of the population in autonomous native states. Meanwhile, after fighting three wars with the Burmese, the first from 1824 to 1826, the second in 1852, and the third in 1885, the British gained control of Burma and incorporated it into India. So, India, Burma was the part of India, and the British forces took their lands. So we see that Britons dominated the economic, political, social life of their conquered lands. The British got the best jobs, held the top government posts, and exploited the natural resources of the country. They also erected social barriers between themselves and the natives, all the while native resentment of the English was growing. In the 20th century, this resentment continued to increase. George Orwell and other writers, including E. F. Forster, were among the dissident voices that called attention to the evils of British imperialism. So we move on to the characters of this essay: the crowd, the elephant, and the narrator. Let us see about his characters. So the characters are very important in this text, and we see their different roles at different times. And we see that the people, the common people, or the general people were not so fine at the time. So we find that the crowd makes itself known through a kind of laughter, the sound that accompanies the petty acts of revenge which the Burmese inflict on their foreign rulers. This same laughter implies a choice which the narrator cannot escape, the choice between becoming the object of the mob's disappointment. Shooting the elephant, a creature which he knows ought to be let alone. The crowd is not a Burmese crowd or even vaguely an Asian as opposed to a European crowd. It is a generic crowd, behaving as all crowds do, with less and less reason, the larger it grows and with an increasing taste for venting its collective resentment against some arbitrary victim. Either the narrator himself, conspicuous because of his office, or the elephant, a convenient substitute and safer because, as a non-human, its victim entails less possibility. And we move on to the other character. Actually, this is not human; it's animal, but the animal also works as the character. The elephant acquires a character during the course of Orwell's narrative, so that even he is not human, he deserves to be mentioned. The narrator describes him as a rogue who has escaped his mahout. Indian, Burmese, and the Thai elephants are working animals used for lifting and hauling. The elephant, therefore, has something analogous to social station. He is a worker and resembles in his servant to master relationship the native Burmese, who have been enrolled without the service of the British Empire. In its final moments, the elephant very much resembles a human victim, which is no doubt what drives the narrator to flee before the agonized animal has died. And we find the narrator, the anonymous narrator of Shooting an Elephant, shares biographical details with Orwell himself. A British police official in Burma, the narrator is a questioning colonialist. He perfectly understands the Burmese resentment of the British, while at the same time he hates the petty harassment that the natives inflict on him and his compatriots. As an ostensible agent of control, he understands that the will of the crowd demands the death of the elephant despite his unwillingness to shoot the animal. So we also find the point of view in shooting an elephant. Oral employs a casually assumed first person point of view. So we, from the very beginning, we find that it starts with I. Oral employs the first person narrative point of view, and it is found that they know primarily from the narrator's direct and apparently uh, speaking. Telling the tale in the first person enables Orwell to engage the rhythm of meditation and action without seeming forced. Because the narrator is reminiscing about the event which occurred sometime in the past. His interweaving of the reflections with the main action strikes the reader as quite natural. The use of reminiscence has a further consequence, that of the splitting off of the narrator as narrator from the narrator as agent of an action. The narrator not only directly reports the impressions and thoughts that he experienced at the time of the elephant episode, he also imposes his present, removed retrospective analysis on the impressions and thoughts of the time. Despite the first person point of view, the perspectives of others, the Burmese also come through since the narrator reports them frankly. We have also discussed the summary of the text, and from that picture, we understand that a man is aiming at the elephant, and the man is going to kill the elephant through the bullets. So in the setting, we also see that the setting is colonial Burma, part of the British Empire, sometime in the late 1920s or early 1930s. So in that setting, we see that how the setting has an effect on the essay. And we also find that the setting has a great value in that essay, because the time we find in this essay reflects the time in which people are living under British colonialism. And it is also found from this text that how people are treated by the British forces. And if you just see on the history, the setting of this text, we'll also see the condition of the common people. And it is also presenting some of the bleak picture of life, because everything was not going in a normal way, because the people had to live in that colonial uh, period, and they don't have anything to say, and they had to endure all kinds of misfortune and the uh, oppression and sometimes the suppression from the governments. Now we move on to our next slide. So we come to talk about symbols. So as you see, that narrator is also a symbol, and elephant also works as a great symbol in this text. And for this reason, we can understand that how these symbols have added value in the text, and which has made the text clear to the audience. The narrator himself is a symbol for the people. As a colonial policeman, he holds authority. He is for them an image of foreign and arbitrary rule, and the object of their resentment and hatred. Signs of his having been reduced by them to a symbol include his being mocked by the young Buddhists and being tripped on the soccer field by Burmese to the sound of the crowd's laughter. A captive laborer who, in his animal fashion, resents his subjugation, he breaks loose, exercises his freedom, tramples one of his tormentors, and finally parks himself peacefully enough in a field. Yet rebellion requires, and he must die. The narrator personifies the elephant, whose death agonies take on extraordinary pathos. The personified elephant becomes a walking symbol of human nature, put upon and deformed, and finally sacrificed for something inhuman, but also sacrificed for the sake of the mob's anger and appetite, so that he becomes the innocent victim of all parties, not merely of the colonial oppression. So the symbol of the elephant has a great value in the text, and from that symbol we can easily understand how the British forces oppress the common people. Now we move on to the themes. That is first to British imperialism and fear of humiliation. Now let us discuss these themes. We find that colonial power in the British for the people of India and how the British imperialism works in that text. So the colonial power is engulfing all the people and all their aims, objectives, and their freedom. How freedom is snatched away by the British force. So we can say that the British imperialism. Throughout the essay, Orwell explicitly discusses the nature of British imperialism, especially the way he, as a police officer, both represents and internalizes the imperial project. He opens by revealing the brutality of the British colonialism in Burma with images of tortured prisoners, and he discusses his distaste for the empire's impact in Burma. He says that he is on the side of the Bur- Burmese people, yet he also resents Burmese people for the way they perceive him. Orwell's self-consciousness as the face of British imperialism is central to his internal conflict as he tries to uphold the image of the impenetrable empire while going against his personal inclination and killing an elephant that he doesn't want to kill. Because he feels that he was compelled to kill the elephant. And you also find the fear of humiliation. Orwell says that the people who are there would laugh at him if he doesn't kill the elephant. In this way, he is compelled to kill the peaceful elephant. He had no feeling or he had no willingness to kill the elephant. In the way that the elephant in this essay can represent the Burmese society, Orwell's fear of humiliation can represent the motive of the broader British colonial project. The imperial police officer is willing to sacrifice his sense of what is right and fulfill the role of oppressor and tyrant in order to save his face. The fear of humiliation is one of the most important motives in Orwell's essay. Now we move on to another theme, colonial resentment and performance of power. So what is colonial resentment? One of the central themes in the essay is a resentment of the colonized people of Burma for the British occupation forces who aim to control their society, yet cannot fully do so, but they have a direct control over their lives. We see the resentment in the open disgust which the monks reveal for Orwell personally, a sentiment that he feels is hypocritical. We see it in the cruel laughter of the Burmese for the British players on the football field. And ultimately, Orwell's awareness of his resentment manifests in his explicit rationalizing for his motivation for killing the elephant. And we now move on to the performance of power. Orwell describes power as being fundamentally performative. It is illustrated as such through the heavily allegorical aspect of his act of shooting the elephants. Openly, Orwell discusses the ways that he must afford the performance of power by not appearing to hesitate in shooting the elephants. With the crowd watching, he must appear to be in control of the situation. The performative element of power subsequently plays out as we watch him in his role as British police officer. It demonstrates his confidence in bringing a wild beast literally to its knees. And we move on to our two themes, that is taming of the colonized subject and the police power. Related to the theme of the performance of power is a clear theme of taming that plays out in the scenario of a man controlling a wild beast. Orwell's self-imposed task of upholding the impenetrable image of the British Empire is part of a larger goal and to control or tame Burmese society. If he moves from his performance, he'll make room for the colonized Burmese to see through imperial control and to subsequently cease to respond to the control. Now we move on to the police power. The experience of the imperial police officer is an experience of representing the empire as a whole. As the face of the British Empire, Orwell is personally subject to the Burmese people's derisions of the empire. To them, he is the empire. By seeing Orwell's personal criticism of that empire contrasted with his experience as a representative of it, he doesn't like it, but he is the part of the system, so he cannot leave it. We are able to reflect on the experience of policing and representing state power more generally. The personal feelings, beliefs, and ideologies of the officer are irrelevant as long as he is in uniform because he represents the colonial force and thus represents a whole other set of beliefs and ideologies. And in this text, we also find about the natural life. When we see the elephant gazing in the paddy field, we see naturalness of its existence. The image of the Burmese inhabitation as a labyrinth of thatched huts is similarly an image of natural life. The presence of the white man or the British Empire contrasts with this naturalness, and their natural scenario has been changed because of the penetration of the British force. Physically disrupts the natural phenomena in the way that Orwell's shooting of the elephant reflects a form of vandalism of natural life. He breaks the natural order. to do the biddings of Burmese bodies and the imperial policing of Burmese society. Uh, we have come to the question session, but before these questions, I'd like to discuss on the autobiographical elements in Orwell's essay. So this text has some similarity with his personal life, as we can see from this text. Shooting an Elephant is an autobiographical essay in which Orwell describes in realistic and graphic details his own experience in Burma during the British colonial rule. In the essay, the author skillfully and artfully delineates or presents his inner conflict and psychological complexities. Orwell was a sub-divisional police officer in Moulmein in Lower Burma. He was hated by a large number of people. There was anti-European feeling in the town. People did not have the courage to start a riot, but they could insult the Europeans or laugh at the narrator, which has been seen in the very beginning of the text. When he was stripped on the football field by some Burmese players, the author would get nervous at seeing the yellow faces of the native, especially the young Buddhist priests, sneering at him. He was upset by the behavior of the Burmese. He was so annoyed that he came to consider imperialism an evil thing. He was in conflict whether he would punish the native or let them in their way. However, as he belonged to the ruling class, he had an opportunity to see everything closely, especially the byproducts of colonialism. He was theoretically against the British rulers. The sight of prisoners and convicts who were cruelly treated oppressed him with an intolerable sense of guilt. He hated the British Raj and regarded it as unbreakable tyranny. On the contrary, he had a great contempt for the foolish, jeering natives. Such contradictory feeling shows the author's dilemma. When he was informed of the elephant, he had a .44 Winchester rifle, which was not strong enough to kill the big animal. He was confused whether the information was correct or not. He was also confused about the direction to the spot because he was informed by different natives about it differently. So he wasn't sure about the incidents. When he reached the spot, he was in a fix because the elephant was as calm as a cow. He was indecisive whether he should kill the animal or not. Before a crowd of unarmed natives, he for the first time noticed the hollowness, the futility of the white man's dominance in the East. He describes his predicament in the following words. The Europeans are regarded as Sahib by the Burmese. He becomes a sort of hollow, posing, a dummy, the conventionalized figure of a Sahib. So it is found that from these lines, we can easily understand that what actually happened in his life. We have come to the end of our today's discussion. Before ending, we'd like to give a conclusion of our today's topic. We can say Shooting an Elephant is a central text in modern British literature and has generated more criticism than any other comparable short piece. In the politicized atmosphere of contemporary criticism, commentators are especially drawn into debate about whether Orwell apologizes for or condemns imperialism. And we see that he was in a dilemma to go which place. But he always hated the British force and the imperialism.